Hi everyone. This is lesson 3.4, which is about different taxes that we actually have to pay, and some things that will actually help you reduce the amount of taxes you have to pay. So we're actually going to talk about two things right now. One is called a deduction and one is called an exemption. A deduction is an amount of money that decreases the amount that you will be taxed. And deductions can be tricky. In fact, this is where accountants really make their living in trying to find lots of deductions for people. So for example, if you own your own business and you have to drive a lot of places, there's something called a mileage deduction. So if you own your own business, you get 57 cents per mile. Some other examples of deductions, if you own your own business and you have to rent a space, that qualifies as a deduction, how much money you're spending on rent. Or if you own a house, the interest that you pay on the mortgage of your house is tax deductible. Deductions can be very complex, so we're not going to get into them very much. But there is something called a standard deduction. Standard deduction is an amount of money that someone can deduct from their taxes automatically without any documentation. So this is called a standard deduction. In other words, let's say I have a business, but I don't want to document all of the mileage that I drive. Or let's say I don't have a business, but I have certain things that would be tax deductible. You can basically apply for what's called a standard deduction. And that's what we're going to do. So I use an example. So I'd actually like to use this as an example. So let's say I started with $100,000, and I'm going to claim the standard deduction. This allows me to decrease my income by $6,300. And this deduction basically says, all right, you made $100,000, but we're only going to tax you on $100,000 minus $6,300. So it's going to actually help us in the long run. It's going to reduce our taxable income to something lower than what we actually made. And deductions can be quite advantageous. If you own a business, like I said, or if you own a house, if you have significant medical bills, there are lots of deductions that can be enacted, but we're going to use the standard deduction of $6,300 for a single person next year. The other thing is there are some different deductions for people who are head of household. So, for example, if you own a house and people live in your house, you can get a higher deduction. But we're gonna stick with the standard deduction. There is something also called an exemption. An exemption is also an amount of money that decreases the amount that you will be taxed. And generally, this is based on your living situation as opposed to your work situation. So for example, your parents can claim you as a dependent. You may have heard them talk about this. And they would get an exemption, a certain amount of money, because you live with them. As a young adult, for example, I can claim an exemption for myself because I take care of myself. So the federal exemption. So for a single person, you can claim if you're not living with your parents, basically, you can claim an exemption for yourself. So you can do this if you are not living under your parents' roof. Okay? So for example, I would claim a $4,000 federal exemption. So for each person that you exempt, you can claim $4,000 basically. So if I was a parent and let's say I was a father working for his family, so I have a wife and 3 kids, I could claim 5 exemptions, one for myself and one for each of the people in my house. This would only be claimed if you're on your own. So this is something that you should be aware of later on in your life. If you're living on your own, you get this exemption. If you plan on living with your parents, you wouldn't get this. So now my taxable income is this minus my deduction and my exemption. So now you're going to be tasked with reformatting your federal income tax formulas to use the taxable income of $89,700. So I'm going to let you use this as an example, and then you can put your own numbers in here. So for example, if you have $35,000 or something like that, you're always entitled to your federal deduction. You're not always entitled to your federal exemption. You have to decide in what cases you would be, and then you can reformat your table.